The dark kept its own hours in the black cells, and Ned Stark learned them as a man learns the cough in his chest or the ache in an old break. There were moments that passed for dawn when the stone did not sweat quite so much and the rats moved softly, as if doubtful of their footing. There were hours that felt like afternoon when a mote or two of dust found some invisible light and turned it. There were the long middles of the night, endless and dense, when the damp breathed against his face and his thoughts could not find the end of themselves. He named none of those hours and called them all the same. It was easier that way. He sat, as he often did, with his back against the wall. He had learned how to wedge his shoulder against a certain fissure and rest the weight of his wounded leg without driving splinters of pain up through his hip. The leg still throbbed when he fell asleep and sent him dreams, sometimes of ice that swallowed horses whole, sometimes of Lyanna's hand, sometimes of a patch of brown leaves and a weirwood's face bleeding sap like tears. He had been a soldier long enough to know what wounds do when a man ignores them. There was nothing to be done here but endure. He had been a boy when he learned that word and what it truly asked of a man. He was older now, and the word had grown old with him. He was not ashamed to use both hands when he stood. He counted, now and again, the slow drop by drop of water from the seam where ceiling met wall. The stone tasted of tin and old blood, though he had no memory of putting his tongue to it. Motes, damp, rat scratch, the faint sourness of stale straw. He kept a place in his mind that smelled of wood smoke and clean snow and the old pine chest in his father's solar at Winterfell. He had found, during a long campaign, that a man could live in two places at once if he was quiet about it. He thought of the weirwood and the godswood at home, the patched bark and the red mouth and eyes, and the way wind moved through its leaves with a sound like river voices. He had prayed there as a child, and as a man, and as a lord. Stone swallowed prayer here, but he said the words anyway, for the sake of saying them and for the sake of not forgetting how. Footfalls came when he did not expect them, though he had tried to learn the sound of the jailer's tread. These steps belonged to silk, not iron. The whisper of it, the way someone could stand outside his bars and let the silence say, "I am here," before lips chose words. He knew who it would be by the pause after the final step, by the faint scent of something clean and dry that had never touched the cells. The torchlight grew. "Lord Stark," said Varys, almost kind, almost only. Where he stood made his face, a gentled, smooth face, seem like a pale coin the rat had found and polished. "I am still that," Ned said, and heard how his voice lived quietly in the stone, as if it were another prisoner. "Until names are pared away to bone, we keep them," Varys replied. "They help us find ourselves in the dark." Ned's hand found the worn line of his breeches at the knee. "You have not come to trade names." "No, but..." Varys' shadow lay like an ink spill across the passage. The torch crackled and popped. "You have daughters, my lord. One in the queen's sight, one unseen." A likeness of anger moved through Ned's chest, the old wolf turning under a net. He kept it bridled. "Arya ta. Your youngest, yes. The city is large and full of holes. A careful man can be lost in it. A careful girl also, if she has someone to point her toward holes rather than streets." "Such a one has." "Yoren," Ned said. Varys inclined his head, a shadow bowing to shadow. "The Black Brothers collect their coin where they can, but they spend it well when they choose to. The child will be kept from the Queen's reach while I can help it." "And Sansa?" "Sansa is in the Queen's sight," Varys repeated. "She writes letters and leaves tear stains on the parchment. She pleads for your life. She learns how to smile when food is placed before her. She is for the moment alive." "Menorwal." Ned's fingers tightened and then let go. "You have come to ask me to confess, to beg mercy. I have come to wear the look of a man who asks that, yes." Varys said with a small, sad humor. "The Queen asks for a written thing in your hand that makes your honor into a cushion for her son's seat. I am meant to suggest that the cushion is softer than the ground you sit upon." "Justice is not a cushion," Ned said. "No," Varys said. It is also not a sword, though men like to hold it so, and weigh their worth by how much blood it has on it. Bah! Ned shifted his leg, swallowing the flicker of pain that came with the movement. I will not write lies. The Queen would call them necessary truths, Varys murmured. She thinks truth is a sort of potter's clay, to be turned on a wheel. Ned closed his eyes, saw again the way Robert had slurred words in the camp tent, the way the king's hand had been heavy on his shoulder, sweat shining on his lip, boar-tusk blood drying brown on the cloak. Robert is dead, and in dying he left a hole many hands now reach into, Varys said. If you must know the currents, know this. The boy sits, his mother stands behind. The small council is no bigger than the Queen's shadow. Renly has run from that shadow with a Tyrell for a lantern. Stannis lights his own flame on his barren island and says it is a star. Rivers burn, for the mountain is a torch that leaves marks wherever it moves. Your eldest rallies in the north. Letters cross each other in mid-air like swallows. And you are everywhere and nowhere, Ned said. I am in the dark, Varys said simply. You could make the dark less hungry by writing. The girl Sansa could be sent home after the proper amount of tears and piety are measured. The girl Arya could be left to vanish like mist. Your own life would be held, if not freely, then on a long leash. No, Ned said, and his voice steadied inside him. I will not bend language so that it no longer bears weight. I will ask for what is mine by old right. Bendersal. It was the first time he had spoken that thought aloud, and for a moment the cell seemed to lean closer, like a man outside a tent putting his ear to the canvas. Even the rat stopped for the space of a heartbeat. Varys' lashes lowered. What right, my lord? The right to set my life and name before the gods themselves, Ned said. I will demand a trial by combat. Let the gods cast their judgment through steel. It is lawful. Even here, even now. The torch spat. Varys watched him the way a man might watch a thing prepare to step onto river ice. It is lawful, he said at length. There are, however, a number of laws, and some have teeth. The Queen will say you cannot call for it in your state. The small council will say traitors have forfeited claims to old custom. The High Septon may be persuaded to cough on incense and declare it unseemly for a man of northern gods to ask the Seven's house to host such a thing. I will not ask the Seven for their roof, Ned said. I will ask the king's court, in the hearing of the realm. Let the small folk listen too. Let them hear a man lay his life upon his oath. If the Queen denies, let that denial be heard as well. Bam! Varys took a breath, and yet for a moment, he looked like a man who had forgotten how. You will do this knowing your leg will not carry you to the far side of a practice yard. Knowing there are few men in this city who would court the Queen's displeasure by standing at your shoulder with a sword. I know these things, Ned said. I have known worse. Men have stood at my shoulder for less right than the right to be heard. Name them. Ned considered his own silence and refused to be shamed by it. He did not have a names list to throw like dice on a board. The men who would have taken his part, laid in a puddle of blood on a cobblestone street, were gone north, wore rags, and had taken vows to a wall of ice. Jory's laugh flickered across his memory like sunlight across a pond. There are men yet in this city who count honor as more than coin. There is at least one. Varys' pale mouth turned very slightly, not quite a smile, as if someone had pressed the memory of one into wax long ago. You speak of the Lord Commander. I speak of a knight, Ned said, not naming Sir Barristan Selmy because names in this place felt like small candles, and he was in the habit of cupping his hand around the flame. And if not him, another. The hound has a way of stepping toward heat, though he tells himself he runs from it. There may be a sellsword here who still mutters old prayers before he sleeps. There may be a man who has long wanted to strike at the Queen and waits for a pretext he can respect. The gods are not starved of men. They are only starved of moments that mean something. And now? And you would make one? Varys said softly. No, Ned said. I would ask for one. Those are different things. The asking is mine. The making is not up to me. The eunuch's eyes were curiously bright. For a man who moved voices like counters on a board, he had made a religion of never letting anyone stay and become a face. Now the face loomed like a truth. "You have never learned how to live here," Varys murmured. "It is almost." He shook his head. "It will be very dangerous to you, and to your daughters." "Everything here is dangerous to my daughters," Ned said, with no heat, only a weight that settled evenly in his chest. "Men can be dangerous to them. Fear can. Mercy can. In the wrong hands. Let danger wear its proper cloak." Varys held the torch a fraction higher, as if he were making a blessing. Shadows stretched like the hides of strange pale beasts along the corridor. "Very well," he said. "If I bring you into the light, will you speak as you have spoken?" "Yes. If I contrive to place this notion where the queen cannot simply lift her hand and snuff it, will you bind your word to it even if you are given a way to bend and live?" "I am not hungry in the same way other men are," Ned said. "I do not forgive myself easily when I cut corners where my father taught me to walk. I will keep my word, then I will do impious things," Varys said. And for the first time Ned believed he was hearing the shape of the man beneath the silk and the scent. "I will go into rooms where you would not ask your own foes to go. I will poke smoke to find the fire in it. I will help you ask." Ned inclined his head. The movement made the world tilt a little, and his leg remembered itself. "Thank you." A real smile. Small, precise, like a seal set upon wax. "No, my lord." If thanks are owed when all is finished, they will be owed to the courage that makes simple words difficult. He lowered the torch, and the light dwindled like water poured out onto dust. "Rest, Dot. Even if you cannot, pretend to." When the darkness settled again, Ned found the groove in the stone and the place on his leg, and let the pain become another of the black cell's hours. He thought of steel and the way it spoke between men. The language he knew best after weather and animals and family. He slept and woke to the same slow drip that had marked his thoughts the day before that, for both of which he had no names. He woke again to different footfalls, the heavy, loyal kind, like a man who believes his bulk is tact itself. A ring of keys chimed once. The jailer's sour breath arrived before his words. He rattled the door open, and the light reached in with the force of a blade thrust. Ned's eyes narrowed to slits. He did not ask questions. He set his palm to wet stone and pushed himself up. He had not been granted a staff, but the jailer threw him a rough-cut length of wood that might once have been a broom handle. It felt like a crude limb. He made no show of pride in refusing it. Pride cost, and costs were counted loudly here. The corridors yielded to stairs, low and steep. They brought him up through stone that had not felt the sun in its core for 1,000 years, and then through stone that still remembered the day it had been placed and the calloused hands that had lifted it. They came into a hall that had a long, fat belly of air, and torches that made reflections creep like insects on polished floors. A line of Lannister red waited at one end, and beyond it, the great doors that led to the throne room. In all cities, a place exists where the public breathes with the same breath, where a shout is a stone dropped into a wide pool. In King's Landing, that place was the throne room. It had a smell of iron and old charred wood that no sweet oil could quite cover. The Iron Throne ate the light and gave back burrs of it. Men had died pointing at that chair, and more had died sitting on it. The boy who sat on it now wore the expression of a child, forced to stay at some solemn meal. His jaw worked as if he ground his own impatience into small, hard grains behind his teeth. Cersei stood to his right, and the space around her seemed arranged to prove that she was nothing so much as the absence of any absence. She was in green, the heavy dark of a rose bower after rain, and there were tiny gold lions that did not glitter so much as lurk among the folds. Her hair fell like a carefully tended field of grain. It made a man think of harvest and then of scythes. Pycelle inclined himself, a sack of meal bowing to another sack d'hier. Littlefinger smiled like a knife laid on a napkin. Varys's face held nothing but court-appropriate concern. Ser Barristan stood flat-footed, his helm beneath his arm, his old eyes on the floor without staring at it. Sir Meryn had a smirk that fit badly, as all borrowed things do. Sir Boros blinked, his lids greasy with fatigue and idleness. The hound leaned in the shadow of a pillar, arms folded, his mouth align, half a face telling a different story than the other half, and both of them in disagreement. Sansa was there too. Ned saw her before he let himself see the throne. Her hands were tight before her, in the shape of prayer, and her little knuckles were pink as if scoured. She had no powder. Her skin showed all that had come near it, a girl's skin that clung to tears a moment longer than a woman's will let them. Their eyes met, just for a heartbeat, and in that heartbeat, there lay the long corridor of Winterfell, and a dog's sleepy breath, and Cat's mouth pinched in fond warning that girls must be careful of tripping over their own feet. Sansa wavered as if on a small boat, then she steadied. The herald made noises that were words, but Ned felt them as a wash of air. The jailer's hand untouched at his back was a promise he did not need. He walked, setting the end of the rough staff down with care at each step, and the hall filled with the sound the staff made, a dry tap that set up echoes like bones. When he reached the place before the steps, the echoes folded themselves into the quiet that came down like a great bird settling. "You are accused of treason against your king," Cersei said. She did not bother to spread the words like a priest spreads oils. She threw them like seed and expected them to grow. "I am accused," Ned said, and the voice he offered the hall was the one he trusted to hold a horse in a storm. He did not kneel. He did not challenge. He did not sneer. He stood the way a man stands at the edge of his own land and does not point to the boundary stones because he knows where they are. "I deny these charges, and I claim my right by the old law and the king's justice. I demand trial by combat." For a moment, the hall was not a place where men lived. It was a pond, and a stone had struck its face. There was the ring of it, and the rising circles. Then there was the noise. Titter, gasp, one flat laugh bitten off, the scrape of a boot, whispers like mice between walls, the sigh from Sansa's small lungs that ran like a silver wire through all the other sounds. And then, under it, the scrape of steel on leather as Sir Meryn adjusted his grip on his sword that reminded everyone his hand could make such a sound. Cersei's mouth sharpened at one corner. A small thing, a nick on a scroll, enough to cut later. An accused traitor, she said, with the weariness of a woman reading a minor clause she had already decided to ignore. "Forfeits claims to." "The law does not say so," came Pycelle's wheeze, respectful because it considered itself to be speaking on behalf of ink and old vellum. "There is precedent, your grace. There is precedent. The law is what the king says it is," Joffrey said in the high, clean voice of a boy who had just been given bad wine, "and insists it is good. And the king says, the king's law and the laws older than any throne can be friends," Varys murmured. "Butter over a knife's edge. And often are at court when the small folk are watching." Littlefinger made a soft sound that might have been approval, and might have been an unvoiced joke at someone else's expense. "The spectacle would be diverting," he said, "and most instructive. The realm dearly loves instruction that comes with trumpets." Cersei did not look at any of them. She looked at Ned. Her eyes were green the way deep water is green when a cloud crosses the sun. "You are crippled," she said. "You could not fight a dog for a bone." "The gods choose their hands," Ned said. "I will choose mine." "And who will choose the other hand?" Cersei asked, not quite smiling. "If the king must be dragged through this old custom, he will choose a champion as well." "Of course," Ned said. "A man could cut his own throat with the wrong words here." He kept the blade turned outward. "That is the law of it." Sir Barristan shifted his weight. It was very small, the kind of shift a man makes to ease a back that has stood too many hours in armor. The hound uncrossed his arms, crossed them again. Sir Meryn scratched at the side of his nose with a gloved finger, and looked pleased to be scratching something. "The seven will need to be appealed to," Pycelle said, and the words, "seven and appealed," sounded heavier coming out of his mouth, like coins too thick to fit through the slot in a coffer. "The High Septon will. The High Septon will consent," Varys said softly. He is a great man, humble and devout. He understands that at times the gods like to be allowed to make a decision in public. No. You will not goad me with your incense, Cersei said to him quite gently. Very well. The king will grant this ancient right. She glanced at the boy. Won't you, Joffrey? Joffrey shifted, as if the throne had found a new point to prick him. He narrowed his eyes, and for a moment a very small cruelty made a shape there. Then it fled, as unpracticed things do. Yes, he said. The king will grant it, and the king will name his champion and see his enemy crushed. He said, crushed, with relish, as if he could taste the pulp. So declared, Littlefinger said, and the words made a little embroidery of their own on the air, neat and unthreatening. The people will want bells. They shall have them, Cersei said. The great septi is large enough to hold all the piety that has bloated this city. The trial will be on the steps, where the sun can witness as well. She smiled then properly. When she smiled properly, she looked in the way of a certain sort of beauty, less like a woman and more like an emblem. 3 days from now, it will give the queen's cooks time to prepare something fitting. Ned looked at Sir Barristan without moving his head. He could taste the iron of the air again, a metallic tiny bite on the tongue. The Lord Commander's gaze remained on the floor for one heartbeat, and then lifted, traveled, set upon Ned for an instant, no longer than the drop that fell in his cell between stone and stone. There was no promise in it. There was no refusal either. It was the look of a man counting up prices and weighing them on the scale that had measured his whole life. Sansa was struggling not to cry. He could feel it the way he had once felt the weight of a falcon he had raised from a chick, trembling with eagerness on the glove, but unable to take wing because the man had not yet opened his hand. She swallowed her tears the way a brave child swallows bitter medicine. Ned gave the smallest nod he could give, and yet be sure she would see it from where she stood. Her eyes found that nod, and drank it like water. The hall filled with voices again because great rooms do not like to be silent for long. Paper was brought and names were written. The kings, the queens, the high septons. A small clerk, whose ink-stained fingers made him look as if he had been bruised by his own work, leaned forward to make neat lines. The 3 days were written, 3 fat little wedges of time set down like pieces of meat upon a table. Varys spoke to someone lightly, with one hand, palm down, as if caressing air. Littlefinger's smile dimmed as if put behind gauze, then sharpened again, because an audience had looked his way. Pycelle dabbed at his lip and called it a thought. The hound pushed himself off the pillar and left the room without waiting for permission, because a hound does not ask to leave when its master has untied the leash. And on the Iron Throne, the boy with the golden hair stared at the place where Ned stood a heartbeat after Ned had been commanded away. And for that heartbeat he seemed lost, as children often are just after they say something cruel, and just before they are praised for it. They put Ned back in the dark, but it was a new dark, and had a different set of hours. The old drip had been joined by a different drip, the sound of the city counting him. He recognized it the way he recognized the sound of snow in the trees, on a night when the ash pit still breathed a little warmth. He sat and measured his breath. Pain lapped at his leg like a tame dog seeking attention. He did not forgive it. He did not send it away. He spoke to the gods in words he had used over dead men, and with newborn sons sleeping under his hand. He asked for nothing particular. He offered the shape of himself, and what was left of his name. That first night he dreamed a simple dream. He stood in the God's Wood at Winterfell with his cloak off, and his sleeves rolled, as if for work. He took his hand to the cold shoulder of the weirwood, and felt the bark give and take and give, like an old friend's hand closing. He did not look down, but he knew there was snow on the grave that lay under the silent leaves. He did not hear the wind. He heard, instead, his own breath, and the small sound a fox makes when it steps near a thing it has been taught to fear, but wants to scent. He woke and did not tell the dream what it meant. He had never been in the habit of wringing meaning out of the small mercies his sleep afforded him. In Maegor's Holdfast, Sansa learned the corridors so well that her feet could make their way along them, while her mind ached with other thoughts. The ladies who clothed her and unbound her hair, and braided it again, whispered, and Sansa had learned how to stand like a candlestick, and pretend she did not hear. When they spoke clearly, They said lovely, consoling things with the exact grace of a needle passing in and out of cloth. The queen was kind to speak to her. Yes. The queen was very merciful to allow talk of the north. How brave the young lady was to suffer such uncertainty with her charming composure. A lady's tears should be like a spring shower. Soft. Not long, leaving no mud. Everyone said so. When she lay in her bed at last, with the white cloth canopy above and beyond it, a square of darkness where the window was, she put her palms over her eyes and pressed until stars blossomed under the lids. She tried to summon Winterfell the way her father had taught her to do when she missed home during her first days at court. To see the great hall and the table with the trenches, and the way the light had found the hounds' coats on festival nights, and to hear the wail of pipes when the snow had piled high, and to feel Lady's nose cool against the inside of her wrist. She could not keep the images from breaking apart like dishes dropped on a stone floor. Why had she said those things to the queen? Why had she tried to be brave in the way she had thought bravery was, when she had only known it in songs? She had brought the queen the thing the queen wanted, which was the truth of a girl's frightened heart. She had said, "I love the prince, and I want to be his queen, and I want my father to be wise and quiet." She said it because she had believed that gentle truth would be met with gentle mercy. The queen had patted her hand and smiled, and said the words Sansa had wanted to hear. But the queen smiled when she cut meat too. And Sansa had seen how sharp a smile could be when it was turned a certain way. She had learned to be frightened of kindness when it moved like a cat, and never took a step unless it saw a mouse. Now her father had stood in that awful hall and said those words that made everyone breathe out at once. The 3 days of Belle's time had been set, and Sansa counted time by dresses fitted and meals sent, and prayers whispered. She learned to sleep after tears, the way a person learns to walk after a long illness, halting and shamed by the weakness of it. She learned to say, in a voice that did not tremble as much as it wanted to, "My father will be judged by the gods." The queen, when Sansa said this, had touched a lock of Sansa's hair where it lay like silk on her shoulder, and said in a soft voice, "The gods have such refined taste." Sansa had smiled in the way a girl smiles when she is trying to teach her mouth to be a lady before it learns to be a woman. She wished for a word like the words in the old tales, a word that could turn iron to water and water to iron. But she had only the words the court had taught her, and the words she had brought from home, and both felt suddenly too large and too small for this place. Cersei did not sleep badly. She slept in the way of someone who believed sleep was an ally that had only to be commanded into formation. She lay long enough to rest the body, and rose when the business of the day required her weight and her smile. In her solar, where tapestries showed tales she had told herself since girlhood, she let the morning be poured for her into a cup, and sipped it while Pycelle said, "Your Grace," in a dozen different tones. "The High Septon," Pycelle said, and by merely saying that name he seemed to summon a thin veil of spice scent. "He is pleased." "Pleased," Cersei repeated, turning the word over like a coin, and noticing its sullen dullness. "He thinks the people will be edified," Pycelle went on. "He imagines that a public appeal to the gods will keep the city from believing all decisions are cooked over your fire. And yet," Littlefinger said from the chair by the window where he had placed himself to be in the path of light, as if he could eat it, "it will also let them taste of your fire." Cersei looked at him without turning her head. "Not everyone gets to be a poet at my expense, Petter." "I would not dare," he said with one of his beautiful little bows. His hands were long, clever hands, the kind a juggler might envy because they never fumbled. "But I may be permitted an accounting. The old wolf has called for theater. The city loves it. The faith loves the smell of piety in the morning. My lord the eunuch loves the smell of piety every hour, though it never touches him. You will be seen to grant justice its sunlight and keep mercy under your cloak for later use. Everyone will come away with something to sell in the next room." Cersei set the cup down. The gold rim sounded against the table, a small thin sound that irritates if repeated. "Who will fight for him?" "Ser Barristan could," Pycelle said slowly. "He is bound by his oath, but he is also bound by his memory of what this city looked like when men still believed their oaths were made to something besides a boy's whims and a queen's patience. Littlefinger put in lightly, "You have not stripped him of his white cloak yet." "We will, soon enough," Cersei said. "He is a relic, and relics have a certain charm to the populace. But the boy must have his own men. Even old bones can be made into a broth that pleases, if boiled with a better meat." "The hound would be pleased to use his sword," Pycelle suggested, with the look of a man offering a dish that has never failed to please and never really satisfied anyone either. "He is fierce, and the people fear him in a way that keeps them quiet." "The hound fights for himself," Cersei said. "He bites where he chooses, but he is loyal enough to bite where you point when it amuses him." "Your Grace might do very well to let the king name him," Littlefinger said. "Let the boy taste a choice and see how it sits on his tongue. He will see victory on the far side of it, and the appetite will tighten into a habit." "And if Ser Barristan answers the wolf's call?" Pycelle ventured. "Then the city will watch an old tale in new clothes," Littlefinger said. "The Lord Commander and the Hound before the steps, Steel telling the story. The crown wins either way. If the Hound cuts the old man, the Queen's strength is proven. If the old man carves the Hound to the bone, the king names his new man as Lord Commander before the small folk and says his father's time is over." His smile was as gentle as a knife placed just so between ribs. "It is as near to a win without risk as this city ever offers." Cersei disliked being told where the safe stones lay, as if she needed a tutor. She set her teeth, considered, allowed herself to approve without seeming to. "We will let the boy name the Hound. We will contrive that the High Septon intones enough to make it seem a matter of faith and law, and not spectacle. And we will have the kitchens prepare sugared almonds, so that when the swords are washed, the people will taste sweetness and attribute it to the victor." "Wanda, you are mercy itself," Littlefinger murmured. "Mercy is the knife," Cersei said, and saw his eyes flicker at that. "What is Sir Gregor's state?" "In the field," Pycelle said. A torch passed, as Lord Varys put it, through the Riverlands. "There are letters," he coughed. "Censures, requests for restraint. Let my father put out that fire if he needs to," Cersei said. She could see her father's face without closing her eyes. Its planes and angles, where a man might cut himself if he did not move carefully. "I have no need of mountains when dogs can be trained." When he was sent for, Sandor Clegane had been in a place not many men would call pleasant. And every time he found himself liking a place, he made note of that, so he could despise himself later for it. He liked heat. He liked the way it pressed upon him and demanded he acknowledge it, because it reminded him of honest pain, and honest pain was better company than most men. He had sat with his back against the wall of a practice yard where the morning sun fell hardest, and watched a stable lad try not to watch him. He had a cup of watered wine because he was trying to keep the day out of his head long enough to fight at sunset if he were asked to. He heard his name like the scratch of a whetstone against an old blade, and he made the messenger say, "Your Grace requests," twice so that he could enjoy the bother. When he came into Cersei's solar, he did not bother to pretend he was in awe of the place. He had known great rooms all his life, and had learned early that the gilding swept dust up, rather than the other way around. Cersei studied him as if deciding whether a particular dog ought to be given scraps from the table. Littlefinger smiled at him. The way men who were afraid of him smiled, with something like pride in their fear, as if they had bought it and wanted their friends to admire the price. "You will fight for your king," Cersei said. She made it a statement, not a question. 3 days from now, on the steps of the great CPI. "Then?" Sandor took a breath, let it run through him like cold sluicing over hot stone. "Who's the other bitch?" The little gasp from Pycelle was a very small bird, crushed under a wheel. Littlefinger's eyes brightened like a man who has seen the first coin of his fortune, spilled on a gaming table. "The hand," Cersei said. "Lord Stark has demanded trial by combat." Sandor's mouth twisted before he could stop it. He let the grimace go, and let it be taken for scorn. "Old man with a stick." "He will choose a champion," Littlefinger said, tongue playing at his lip. "He will not choose you. He cannot choose his friend," because the hand is poor in friends at court. There is, however, a relic that may stir if the right incense is burned. The old knight, Sandor said. Ser Barristan sell me, Pycelle murmured reverently, as if he were telling a story to a child in which a saint had touched a beggar's wand and made it vanish. A living legend, a blade that has never rusted. Blades rust, Sandor said. Men do. Leggings just get talked over. He chewed the thought like a string of gristle. He could see it, certainly. The old man's careful feet. His eyes that had seen too much to blink at a clever feint. The way his decisions would all be decisions made by a man who understood. He had only a handful of them left. I'll cut him. I do not require him dead, Cersei said. I require the trial to end with the king's will known. If killing is what the gods ask for, then kill. If not, do not spoil my floor. Will there be fire? Sandor asked, because if there were to be those fucking green-scented men with their brass things, he would want to know. Not on the steps, Cersei said. Incense only. The High Septon loves to smoke like a ham. Sandor rubbed his scars because he always did when incense was mentioned, and only after he had done it did he realize he had done it in front of them. Littlefinger's eyes flicked to the gesture and back. Sandor showed him his teeth, very white in his ruined face. Good, he said, as if it had been his decision. Your loyalty will be noticed, Cersei said, with the air of a queen who tosses a small cold jewel into a peasant's lap and expects gratitude for the bruise. Noticed, Sandor said. I like to be noticed. He could not tell if the boy would watch the fight closely or not. The boy liked to see hurt things. He did not like to watch men do the work of making those things hurt. He liked to see the results only. Sandor had no patience for the boy's hungry little mouth when it said, more. After he had left them, he found a place by himself where he could set his back to stone and his thoughts to nothing in particular. He did not picture his sword biting into the old man. He did not picture losing. He did not give names to the eventualities as if he were a priest telling beads. He thought about the girl's eyes in the hall, the old man's girl, and the way they had looked at her father as if she had been taught that looking would protect him. He spat, and the spit landed on the stone and spread into a little wet place. He put his heel on it and ground it up as if it were a beetle. Ser Barristan did not sleep poorly. He had learned, over the long, slow diet of years, how to shut the door on a day's noise and leave it in the corridor for other feet to scuff through it. But there are doors and doors, and some nights the hinge goes wrong. He woke while it was still night, and the city was an old man turning in his bed and coughing. He sat and did not reach for his sword, because he was not the sort of man who reached for a sword in a dark room like a child who reaches for a toy at the first sound. He sat until he could feel the shape of his breath in his chest. Then he rose, and because habit is as good as consolation, he put on a plain tunic and went down to the yard. He trained alone when he could. It was easier to admit how old a man is when there is no one to follow his breath with pity disguised as respect. He drilled cuts in the air with a steel that felt heavier some mornings and lighter others for no reason he could place. He drilled them until the air itself seemed to hold the ghost of the blades passing, a pale line that did not depart at once. He stepped and turned and bent, and let the body find the shortest line between purposes. He had been taught by men who were dead now, and he still asked them questions sometimes. He did not know whether the way he listened for their answers was piety or folly. He preferred not to call it anything. The names could come after, when someone else told the story. He was still in the yard when Varys came, of course. No, not Varys. A boy with Varys' expression. It was always Varys in some fashion when people came to him softly, as if they had spread feathers over their approach. The boy carried a message that was not written down because words written down had begun to grow teeth in this city that bit the hand that fed them. The message was simple. A man who had been a page in one king's time and a squire in another, and who had watched the Lord Commander shorten a boy's grip on a sword because he had not noticed his thumb was high, would like to speak with him. It was not an invitation he could ignore without making something break. He wiped the blade carefully with a cloth, set it in its place, and went to a place in the Red Keep no one cared for, because it held nothing anyone needed to be seen near. Varys stood with his hands folded, as though he were a gentleman attending his own funeral, and wanted to make a good impression. "Lord Commander," he said, "forgive the hour. The morning is kinder to men like us." "You are not a soldier," Barristan said mildly. "I am not much of anything," Varys replied, and made the words sound like a compliment. "It leaves me free to convey other men's burdens, and sometimes to redistribute them." "You will talk to me of burdens," Barristan said. "Speak plainly." "A man has claimed his right," Varys said. "The old right. The right that makes blood respectable when it stains stone under sunlight. A father has put his life in the weight of the gods' hands, so that he need not put his daughters in anyone's else." His gaze lifted, met Barristan's, did not flinch. "He will choose a champion. He will ask you. If he does, will you dress truth up in your white cloak and let it walk at your side?" Barristan considered the question without letting the wind of old tales whip his cloak about. "The hand is accused of treason. The boy is the king." "A boy is a boy," Varys said. "And a king is a king. These facts create nuisances when they are combined. I am his sworn sword," Barristan said. The words came out evenly. He did not have to smooth them with practice. They had been worn smooth by many mouths and hands and years. "I do not carve out an exception, because the man who calls looks me in the eye with a courage that reminds me of a better time." "The better time was only better in memory," Varys said gently. "Forgive me. We lay gold leaf over old wood, and call it a miracle when we discover the grain again." Barristan smiled. "The smallest crack in stone. Do you want me to fight for Ned Stark?" "I want the realm to remember it has eyes," Varys said simply. "When there is a scene before them, they can watch. If it is a thing worth watching, they may recall that they are not just mouths. You cannot give them that by yourself. But you can refuse to be a blind man with a stick leading 1,000 others." "Beautiful," Barristan said dryly. "And useless to me. I know what oaths are. They are the thing that keeps me from saying yes to men who deserve yes, and yes to men who deserve no. If oaths were only garlands to be thrown off when a man wished to feel the wind in his hair, there would be no use to the name of a knight at all." "See." Varys inclined his head. "Then forgive my presumption. It is a trying vice. They line the lanes with men who presume." "Will the queen put the hound before me?" Barristan asked quietly. He did not need a reply. He simply wanted to say the shape of the duel aloud and see if it sat. "She will," Varys said. "The boy will name him and feel the strength of having named him." "He is strong," Barristan said. "He is bold. He hates fire, and there will be no fire there." "Damn. No," Varys said. "Only a great deal of smoke." Barristan pictured the steps of the Great Sept. He could see the stone color when the sun had been on it all day, and how it held the warmth and made a man feel he stood on a living thing. He pictured the press of the small folk, their eyes sharp and greedy when there was something to be had that was not food. He pictured Sansa Stark, who had said please so carefully, as if saying it right were a net that could be thrown over a problem and drawn tight until the flapping stopped. He heard his own bones speak. They said, "Choose." "I will not beg the Lord Stark to ask me," Varys said, low. "But I will not deny him passage to me if he wants my counsel. The rest is in your hands." "My hands have held too much," Barristan said, but not in complaint. He had no complaint. A man did the work that stood before him, and left the complaining to those who wanted to tell tales afterward. "Could you cut him then?" The boy who was once a page asked before the man who was a eunuch could answer for him. He felt the little bolt of rudeness, and did not apologize for it, because rudeness often broke the little amber apple that had trapped a single, honest fly. "Could you cut the hound?" "Yes," Barristan said, because lying was a kind of cowardice he had never found room for in his kit. "It would be difficult. He is a bear that knows he is a bear. But he is not a cat, and I have fought bears. Bears are fallen by patience." He turned his face toward the east. The sky had gone pale in a way that made men think of the faint undersides of fish. The bells, those bells that would ring with all the pride of the great sept 3 days hence, were quiet. He wished they would ring now, so that he could put their clangor between his thoughts and the path that did not lie yet under his feet. Arya moved through the city as a cat moves when it envies ferrets. She was small and nimble, and learned quickly which channels to choose and which to avoid. Yoren was the rock she put her back to when the street tried to crush in, and the smell of him was straw and old ale, and something else that was not unpleasant because it had not been cleaned properly in a long time. He had a gentle way of shoving that did not bruise, and a mean way of glaring that reminded men around them they had other places to be. He had taken away her name and given her a boy's, and she wore it because names could be like cloaks when the wind was going the wrong way. She had not mewed after her father. She had not begged the old man to let her run up to the Red Keep's gate and throw herself against it and call until her voice broke. She had thought of it. She had thought of how it would feel to pound on something until her fists were meat, and of how she would like to show the wall how stubborn she was. Yoren had put a hand on her shoulder and given it one hard squeeze, and that had been enough. Something inside her that wanted to run was caught by that squeeze and held. She found instead the rivermen and the donkey carts and the coppersmiths, who made that particular sweet metallic clatter she liked, because it sounded like a song nobody else knew how to sing. She watched boys fight, the cruel, joyless kind of fighting that had nothing of dance in it. She put herself where they could not see her watching, because she had learned the first lesson Sirio had put into her. You are not the best thing in the room just because you have the most courage in your mouth. Sirio's wooden sword lived in her mind like a heartbeat. She touched the handle of the knife Yoren had let her keep, and it felt nothing like the dancer's practice blade, but also like everything that mattered about it, because it could separate this from that and make a choice that could not be undone. When the bells began to talk about the trial, the city became a person with something new in its pocket that it wanted to show its friends. Men leaned their heads together. Women who generally kept their voices hard as a measure of respect for themselves let them go high and silly for a moment. Boys pretended to be the hound and cut each other with sticks. Girls pretended to be queens and wrinkled their nice dresses in front. Arya did not play. She listened and learned what words were chosen and which were thrown away. She knew then, not by any plan but by a snarl that tightened in her gut, the way a cat tightens its gut before leaping, that she would go to the steps. Yoren told her no 5 different ways that meant the same thing, and she learned that none of those ways contained an offer to keep her from trying. She nodded and lowered her eyes and said something in the small voice of the boy whose name she wore. She moved away from his shadow, and then at the first turn she was gone, slipping between men as if they were tall reeds by a riverbank, and she a water rat with somewhere to be. 3 days is time enough to set a field in rows. The city arranged itself for seeing. Merchants, with a sense for where eyes would fall, set their carts along the safest edges of the great sept square. They sold almonds and apple tarts and cider so watered a priest would have smiled at it. The poor brought their eyes only, the way they always did. The middling people brought their children so the children would remember and tell it later as if it had been theirs. The high brought their patience and their shade and their lip salve. The acolytes went about their sleep with incense braided into it, and rose perfumed and ill-slept and important. The high septon practiced the words that felt most like stone in the mouth. Cersei spoke to someone about cloth and shade, and how to keep the boy's hair from looking untidy in sunlight. Ned rose from the black cells for the last time that was not the last time. He was lifted by guards who did not want to be seen betraying any sympathy, and so had to be careful with him in order to appear to be rough. He had been washed. The water had been cold and honest, and he had put his face to it and held it there because he wanted to go to the steps smelling of something that did not belong to his stone. They had given him a plain tunic and a cloak, not of his house's colors, because this trial did not belong to houses. He put it on with the same care he used when putting on a lord's name, and the same indifference to the opinions of men who weighed cloth. Varys came only as a shadow on an opposite wall when they brought him up. Littlefinger did not come at all. He would go ahead, because he liked to be in the place where a thing would be watched rather than in the place where it was made. Pycelle came in the way that old men come to events they intend to speak of, but not to. Sir Barristan came not to Ned, but to the small chapel in a corner of the sept, where the likeness of the Father had been carved in wood. He knelt there without kneeling completely. His body settled, and the wood welcomed him with a creak like an old friend finding room in a bench for another old friend. Sansa was dressed in pale blue, and she had decided that she would not let anyone paint her mouth this day. Her hair lay in 2 ropes down her back, because sharp braids felt like a lie. She stood where the queen had placed her and did not move from it, and when the queen touched her shoulder briefly with a kind hand, Sansa did not flinch the way she had learned to flinch when a thing was sudden. Sandor stood at the foot of the steps and looked up. He had never liked stairs. Stairs made things into theater, and though he did not mind the audience when he was the best thing on the stage, he hated the feeling of climbing into someone else's show. He found a place to the side and eased his sword in its sheath, and checked the strap that held his cuirass. He breathed through his mouth because the incense was already crawling about like cat smoke, friendly and treacherous. The bells began to ring. It was a sound that could never be private. Bells in King's Landing meant a thing had begun. The sound climbed the city's slopes and slid down its gutters. It put itself into the ears of men who were not there, and made them look up and pretend they had not cared whether they heard it or not. The first long bell set a tone like a blade struck gently. The second answered. The third and fourth found a rhythm, and the rhythm became a walk, and the walk became a procession. Ned came out into the sunlight, and it felt like being struck. He did not look away. He let his eyes sting, and then accept it. He measured the way the wind came through the square, and tried to keep it in the corner of his mind because wind mattered on a day when steel would flash. He did not look at his daughter until the moment came when he could not look anywhere else first. He looked at her long enough to bury a father's hand thoughtfully in a father's heart and leave it there. Then he lifted his chin and looked at the High Septon. The High Septon wore a face that had been carved to be seen by many people at once. It was the face of a loving grandfather in a tale told by a nurse who had not had children. He stretched his hands, and incense curled around his wrists like thin, eager snakes. He intoned words that had the thickness of age. They fell on the steps like very old coins and made the same dull music. He spoke of the father's justice, the warrior's strength. He was careful when he spoke of the stranger. He pronounced the old right and the old oath. He called for champions. Joffrey sat on the chair they had placed for him as a way of pretending the Iron Throne had left the hall for the day. He looked small on it, though the chair had been made small intentionally. He lifted his hand, and a page cried the name of Sandor Clegane, because the boy had named the hound, and no one could pretend it was not his choice. There, Sandor said softly to himself, a man acknowledging a hound call. He stepped forward and down into the sunlight. He had not oiled his sword too heavily. The blade did not wink. He did not raise it yet. He looked at the old man on the steps, the Lord Commander, and for a long half-breath, the world narrowed to something Sandor had always understood. The space between two men who were not speaking all the words they knew, because the time for words would pass momentarily and be replaced by something simpler. And for the accused? The High Septon said, turning his old, careful gaze. Ned felt the weight of it settle on him like a cloak. He opened his mouth to name the knight he hoped. He would not say the name in his head, would not press meaning too hard on something that might break, but he opened his mouth, and in the instant before he could speak, a motion like a thought occurred at the edge of the assembled men. Sir Barristan moved, or rather ceased to remain still. He did not step forward at once. He did something more treacherous. He half turned his head, his eyes moving, a man looking to see where his king's eye lay, where the queen's smile stood, where the god's image waited. He found each thing, measured it, and then he straightened and came forward, his white cloak taking the light and giving it back with indifference. "I will stand," he said, in a voice that did not ask for anyone's blessing. He did not look at the queen as he spoke. He looked at Ned, and in the look there was no apology and no pride, only the finality of a man who has decided that his oath is a road with one bend in it, and he has found that bend and taken it. A sound then, not a shout yet, but the deep intake of breath from the square. The High Septon nodded very slowly, as if this had been arranged all along between him and Old Law. Cersei did not change expression. because she had learned long ago how to let her feelings happen behind her face like coins counted under a table. Joffrey frowned, petulant, as if someone had spoken while he was trying to decide between two coats. Littlefinger watched with that fascination he reserved for men who turned into the things he had guessed they were not. Varys lowered his eyes like a man at prayer and hid a smile that was not pleasure. Sansa clutched her own fingers so hard that the bones again went pink, and this time purple under the skin. Ned did not thank Barristan. He did not move his head because the world had narrowed and settled. He named the champion as the law required, and the name went out and crashed against the square's walls, and came back smaller, as such things do when the first surprise has passed. Words were said. Blessings were made. The acolytes bowed and lifted their censer-long chains, and then took them away so that the smoke drifted aside and left room for the clean air. Sandor drew his sword, and it made a sound that was exactly itself. Ser Barristan drew his sword with less sound, as if the blade had been waiting already drawn in some private shape of the world, and had only now decided to become visible. They came down from the steps together like old acquaintances walking side by side to a place where both would be seated. They separated the distance between them, and let it live. Because distance is as much a weapon as what one holds in the hand. Sandor rolled his shoulders once, very slightly, and then became the stillness that beasts know just before they break into a run. Barristan set his weight in a place he had set it 1,000 times, and found it to be where it had always been, and the knowledge steadied him. Ned breathed in, and knew the taste of sunlight, and incense and city dust. And over it, the fainter note of something that had come out of his dreams. A cold tang, as if snow had been ground under someone's heel 30 years ago, and had only now decided to send its breath down to this step. He put his hand on the rough wood of the staff the guards had allowed him to keep for his leg. He felt the coarse fiber splinters stand under his palm. He did not feel fear as men talk of it to each other in tents, so they can pretend to be brave. He felt the weight of what might follow if one blade missed and another did not. Above them all, the bells paused, as if the city drew breath with the men below. Sandor lifted his sword. Ser Barristan answered. In that first meeting of steel, before the watchers could be sure whose step had gone first, and whose blade had told the other where to go, there was something clean. It had no place in truth, in the city, which preferred its things dirty and well handled. It was nonetheless there, like a clear note struck. Sandor pressed, and the old knight felt the strength of him exactly as a man feels the weight of a river when he puts his leg into it in spring. He did not try to match it bone for bone. He let it pass by him and shaped a channel for it, and then set a rock in that channel's path. Sandor's mouth did its usual thing. The scar pulled it to the side and made contempt into necessity. The second meeting was louder. The third was quieter than both, because the men had begun to speak to each other in a language that does not require demonstration. Sandor tried the old trick on the old man. He bore down and then pulled away, making room for a slash that often found men's throats when they had been told their lives were safe where they stood. Barristan had seen that trick before the hound had been born, and could have executed it with his eyes shut. He set the edge where it must be, and let the slash find a place to die. He did it without making it look easy. He had learned long ago that making things look easy made men tell tales that skipped the part where you thought of dying and decided to go on anyway. The crowd began to move, as crowds do, like something with its own mind. There were small pockets of silence where men bent their heads forward, and small pockets of eager laughter where boys had wagered on blood. The High Septon's attendants moved wrinkled hems and kept their mouths composed, as if their faces were censer lids that floated upon their own holiness. Cersei folded her hands together in front of her and marveled, not for the first time, that spectacle was so effective a solvent. Littlefinger's eyes were sharp, counting possibilities. Varys did not count. He watched the way sunlight slipped along the blades like a fish, and thought about whether fish knew they were handsome when light touched them. Sansa did not breathe at all for the length of 7 heartbeats, and then let breath go because darkness had begun to crowd the edges of her sight. She planted her feet and did not faint. She did not weep. She did not pray out loud. She moved her mouth around a name and then swallowed it. She wanted to ask the world to pause the way a dancer lifts a foot and holds it in the air because holding it is the best part of the step. Arya had found a post to climb and held to it with her legs, the way she and Bran had once held to the broken tower's stones with the surety of small, stubborn bodies. She did not cheer. She was not a cheering thing. She watched for openings and thought where she would put a blade if she were tall, and if her arm were not so small, and if Syrio had taught her the half-cut he had meant to teach her, but had not, because a man with a bad face had come into a room to take her, and had found only a wooden sword standing in the mouth of a lion. Sandor changed his mind about patience and went in hard, as men do when they realize patience only brings on a different sort of fatigue. He cut across and down, testing old knees. Barristan let his knee be tested because anything that had stood under 3 kings could stand one more test. He stepped in rather than away and put his own edge where the hound's edge had wanted to come to rest. They clanged and parted. Barristan used the small space to breathe once in a way that taught tiredness the rules. No, not now, we have our agreement. The sun felt hotter on stone than on skin. Ned could feel it in his bones, the way a man who has lived through winters knows exactly how the snow lays a hand on certain hills and not others. The sword spoke. They did not tell him what would be said tomorrow in kitchens and guardrooms and alleys, or what would be sung badly in taverns. They told him only that the time for words had ended for the moment, and he had been brave, and being brave made no promises about what would come next. He accepted that as a mercy. 3 exchanges later, Barristan found the first small place in which to place a teaching. He tapped the hound's blade. Not hard, just a sound, so that for an instant, the other man had to listen to the sound of his own sword. Sandor listened and snarled, because listening had never been his favorite measure of a man. He came in all at once in an ugly rush that had broken better men and found, to his surprise, that he did not break this one. Barristan took a little cut on his forearm as the price of denying a larger one, and the blood came. It ran in a clean line down past the wrist. The crowd made the sound a crowd makes at first blood. The quick, silly cooing of pleasure disguised as pity. Cersei let her lips part just enough to taste the air. It tasted of incense and sweat, and something like copper, and underneath it, if she were a different sort of woman she might have said it tasted of possibility. She was not that. She breathed, and thought of which lords would take which stories back to which castles, and how that would affect the price of grain, and the rate at which men turned their coats in the next month. She looked at Sansa out of the corner of her eye, and saw that the girl was learning something indelible, and would never be the same. Good, Cersei thought, though good in her head did not often resemble anyone else. Littlefinger leaned a fraction toward Varys. Even odds, he whispered. Nothing is even, Varys breathed back, not bothering to move his lips. You are such a disappointment, Littlefinger said cheerfully. The hound laughed once. A low, short sound that said anger had come to help. He put the laugh into his arm and the arm into the blade. Barristan gave way 2 steps, because when a man is taller and younger and furious, sometimes politeness is to give him his 2 steps and take them back when he runs out of breath. He took them back at once, because the hound did not run out of breath. Steel rasped and sang, a duet with no melody, only rhythm. Sandor wore his contempt like a helm. Barristan wore something like sorrow, but it did not make his sword gentle. The square breathed with them, and then against them. Men's elbows dug into other men's ribs. A child cried because somewhere far away in the crowd, a mother had pinched a small ear to keep it from stray hands. The High Septon's voice lifted now and again into another prayer, as if he could coax the gods to send a breeze to ruffle the climax. Ned set his weight more firmly on the staff. He thought of the last time he had watched 2 men he loved fight each other for practice on a late afternoon, when the light had been as golden as the apples in Cat's lap afterward, and how he had felt then that the world was deep enough to accept their blows and their laughter both. He was not sure this city was deep enough for laughter that was not cruel. He held his breath. He did not realize he held it, when Barristan stepped a half-inch too late, and Sandor's edge found the place where old leather had grown thin above a rib. The cut was not deep. It was not nothing. Blood is a thing that grows a voice when it is seen. The square made the new sound, older than the others, less stylish. It said, "We know what this means." Sandor came on behind the cut, because a man is wise to press when the smell of blood is new in the air and men are listening for it. Barristan answered, with a small, neat down cut that would have bitten knuckle if Sandor had been less quick. He felt the tremor of meeting through the hilt and into his shoulder. He baptized that shoulder in memory. Years fell off his arm. They did not fall off his chest. He smiled despite himself. An old man's smile that owned itself. It startled Sandor because the old man looked not pleased, but at home. They circled, without moving their feet much. It was an intelligent circle, the kind that would be invisible to anyone who had not held a sword long enough to know that circles can be maps. Sandor changed direction and made his left leg tell the truth by driving it first. Barristan watched the truth, and when it came to ask him for his life, he gave it a coin and sent it away. Ned's breath steadied. He let the rhythm of steel be a prayer. He meant to say, if he lived through this moment and the next, that he had been present. The gods could choose through blades. Men could choose through courage. The city could choose through stories told after. He did not know what choice would be made. He knew only that this moment had been asked for properly and offered up properly, and that those two things are as close to an answer as men get in this world. On the 5th or 50th exchange, time was a skin stretched tight now and did not fit well. Sandor's foot hit a line of grit on the stone and slipped the smallest degree. It was not enough to change his stroke. It was enough to change how much of his weight believed in it. In that breath of space, Barristan delivered the lesson he had come to teach. A clean, straight cut to the same place he had, a breath ago, denied with his life. The cut landed not with the drama of a psalm, but with the stout satisfaction of a man closing a door he had planned to close all day. The hound staggered a half step. His blade swept across in a loyal reflex. Barristan took the sweep on his guard. Sandor's lip curled because lips curl at the scent of what might be desperation, even when it is your own. The square's sound rose, because squares love to rise and fall like the sea when sailors believe their voices call the wind. Sansa's hand came away from the other hand with a faint stickiness, where sweat and fear had made them one. Arya's teeth bit her own tongue lightly, and she tasted the iron in herself and minded it because she wanted to keep it. Cersei looked at the High Septon and saw that he was glazing. She despised that. She respected men who watched a thing to the end with every sense they had. The boy had stopped fidgeting. He watched with a narrow, spiteful joy. She saw, in that joy, all the small ways the world would complicate her plans. She loved him anyway, in her fashion. Because love is also a plan a woman makes when no other is sufficient. Ned watched old and young measure themselves against each other, and understood that this too was his trial. The gods would read the blade and judge him. But even if the blade fell against him, the courage here would not be wasted. There are economies the city does not understand. They involve breath, and the way a man lets go of it without using it to make a lie. Barristan pressed. And it was not the kind of pressing a man does when his blood is hot and he wants it to go to the right places. It was the pressing of a man who has decided the shape of the end and is going to meet it standing up. Sandor took the press and made something in himself laugh at it, because he had laughed at worse pressures, at fire, at hunger, at the way men looked when they thought they might understand him and wanted not to. They came together and parted. They came together again. The sun moved slightly. Dust seemed to taste of metal. The city's mouth grew dry. Words died on them. The bells were quiet, mercifully quiet, with the happy cruelty of a thing that knows men will wish for it later when their ears ring with a different sound. In that poised hush, with steel hung between conclusions, Ned felt the world look at him, just him, for a heartbeat. Not as a lord, not as a traitor, not as a father, but as a man who had put something into the hands of the gods without knowing what they would do with it, and had done so not to clean his own conscience or to make a story, but because it was the correct thing. He welcomed that gaze into his bones, where honor slept, and woke it, and let it stand up and breathe. Sandor drove in again, and Barristan accepted, and their blades crossed at a point so pure, the sound was almost pretty. The moment held, and holding, promised that it would not hold forever.